Why doesn't Hisoka want to fight Kurapika? It's not a simple question to answer because Hisoka is not a simple man. He's a very complex series of rubbery, gummy whims, constantly intersecting and getting stuck to one another and just confusing the whole situation for everyone involved. There is a logic to it though, and everything stems from the very first arc. During the Hunter exam, Hisoka was an applicant. However, he had far less interest in passing the exam than he did in administering his own exam. Hisoka was using a lot of his time to find, how shall we put this, potential playmates. I use that term because Hisoka tends to describe the people he's interested in as toys. But since nothing in this exam could threaten him, Hisoka chose to use his time more efficiently. Hisoka's quest to find someone to satisfy his battle boner is most prominent in the Milsey Wetlands, which was part 2 of the first phase of the Hunter exam. Although it was more like the 5th trial in total at that point, I don't know, a lot of things happened. During this phase, Hisoka encountered a group of 3 people whom he decided to test. This group consisted of Kurapika, Leorio, and you, good old you, candidate number 76, whose name is allegedly Cherry. Yes, good old Cherry. Sure, he'll be important to the future of the series. The one generic character design, standing next to 2 very clear main characters. Now, he doesn't exist to die at all. In any case, Hisoka's test is as follows. He walks towards them intimidatingly, and the test is to judge what they do in response. At which point Kurapika and Cherry choose to run, however Leorio decides to stay, even knowing that he has no real chance of beating Hisoka. Furthermore, a wild Gon also appears as a surprise candidate to assist Leorio. Leorio gets thwacked in the face, and Gon is treated to the close-up smile of a child groomer. However, Hisoka says that both of them have passed the test. He even picks up Leorio and carries him to the end of the phase. But whilst both Leorio and Gon passed Hisoka's exam, Kurapika failed the exam because Hisoka wasn't looking for people who constantly run away from him. He already had that sort of relationship happening with Chrollo. No, Hisoka was looking for people who excite him, to be willing to indulge his battle clowny whims. And I guess you could think of it as a sort of twisted speed dating. Hisoka was looking for someone to actually engage with him, as opposed to Kurapika, who in this metaphor just looks disinterested for the entire date and swiftly moves on as soon as he possibly can. Cherry also failed this exam, and so Hisoka went on to brutally murder him for the lols afterwards. But it's not so much that Hisoka wasn't interested in Kurapika, it's more that he knew that Kurapika wasn't interested in him. Let me explain via Gon. After this experience, Gon recalled the terror of Hisoka and said, well, it's weird, but it felt pretty exciting too. Ding, ding, ding. That is a match. That is exactly what Hisoka wants. Someone who also understands the thrill of deadly combat, which is why Gon becomes the obsession from here on out. Kurapika doesn't understand that, and Hisoka may be many things, but consensual combat is important to him. And right now, the only 2 candidates for that are Gon and Leorio. However, that did shift a bit during Hisoka's interview with Netero. When Netero asked which candidates Hisoka finds most interesting, his response is 405 and 99, aka Gon and Killua. But he also replies that he doesn't want to fight either of them just now, assumedly because they need time to grow like the juicy battle fruit that Hisoka sees them as. But Kurapika isn't even in this conversation. At this stage, he's a bronze medal, maybe even lower, because Illumi was also participating in the exam, who would have caught Hisoka's interest. And at this point, even Leorio was showing more of what Hisoka was looking for. Of everyone here, Kurapika is like a 5 out of 10. Acceptable in a desperate situation, I suppose, but not something that you go out of your way to pursue. However, this did not stop Hisoka using Kurapika. Hisoka and Kurapika did briefly fight during the final stage, although Hisoka quickly put a stop to that with his special whisper, drawn here by Togashi in a panel that makes it look like they're about to kiss, and is even more lipsomely charged in a later flashback where Togashi really puts an emphasis on those their lips. Hisoka basically said, I know a thing about the spiders, so meet me at this time at this place. He said, meet me in York New City on September 1st. That is both a time and a place. It's a big city though. But then he resigned, essentially being the one to give Kurapika his hunter license. So Kurapika may have failed Hisoka's test, but at the very least, he passed another. However, there may still be some interest here. When the meeting time finally comes, a sensation Hisoka is very familiar with, he states, don't worry, I don't intend to fight you now, which is one of the very few pieces of evidence that shows that Hisoka has any interest in Kurapika at all. But in this world of Gons, Killuas, Illumis, and Chrolololos, Kurapika just isn't worth the investment right now, and potentially won't ever be worth it ever, which I find fascinating because of everyone in this series, Kurapika is the one who I would say is closest to Chrollo in almost every regard. Obviously, this wasn't a factor during the Hunter exam due to a lack of nen and experience, but Kurapika's true potential would become apparent apparent during Yorknew. The key thing here though is that Hisoka is using Kurapika to get closer to Chrollo. Hisoka's primary issue is, going back to the dating metaphor, that Chrollo is always surrounded by his friends. There's never an opportunity to approach Chrollo alone and try to lay on some of the classic battle clown charm. So he wants to use Kurapika to draw Chrollo's friends away. In essence, Kurapika during this arc becomes Hisoka's wingman. And he even makes this quite clear to Kurapika by saying, "It's not like we're getting married, just some give and take," which is Hisoka laying down the boundaries of this relationship. "Look, Kurapika, nothing is going to happen between us. We're just friends." In fact, yeah, Hisoka is basically friend-zoning Kurapika here. However, at the end of Yorknew City, heartbreak occurs, as Hisoka's wingman ends up doing the exact opposite and cockblocks Hisoka by taking away Chrollo's ability to use Nen. And I think this says a lot about Kurapika's battle dating potential. He, mostly on his own mind you, outsmarted and outplayed the Phantom Troop. This is very Chrollo-like behavior, and yet Hisoka still has no interest. What happens is that Hisoka spends his time pining over the loss of beloved Chrollo, even going so far as to enter Greed Island to find a Nen exorcist to rectify the whole situation. Now, to be completely fair here, at the time this occurred, Kurapika would have been off limits regardless. Hisoka knows that Chrollo has been cursed, and so the one person Hisoka cannot engage is Kurapika, because killing him, as fun and maybe sensually satisfying as it could be, would only make his goal of fighting Chrollo an impossibility. The troop themselves gave up on trying to kill Kurapika because they assumed that the potential post-mortem Nen would only intensify the curse. But every bit of behavior up until this point shows Hisoka's feelings towards Kurapika are very battle platonic. He respects Kurapika, but there's no real desire to take that next step. And why is that? Because I personally don't see what Hisoka loves so much about Chrollo that he doesn't also see in Kurapika. The two of them both like to play hard to get, Kurapika demonstrating this when he ran during the Hunter exam. Meanwhile, Chrollo constantly vanishes from Hisoka and even ran for a whole year straight after having his curse lifted. They're both very no-nonsense, extremely intelligent, and wildly versatile Nen users. In fact, at this point, Kurapika can also steal Nen abilities, so there's always an element of surprise, much like with Chrollo. The only real difference at this stage is that Chrollo is much more mature than Kurapika. He is juicy battle fruit ripe for the picking, but Kurapika also has that potential. And yet, there's never any Gon-style swing in that general direction. So perhaps Hisoka just isn't interested in blondes, or maybe he's much more combat monogamous than we've been led to believe. Except that's not true at all, because the chairman election arc showed us more so than any other that Hisoka is a combat polygamist. Hisoka showed up to the election like a tourist in Amsterdam visiting the red light district. He was there to assess candidates for his own personal pleasure, sifting through a rather disappointing sea of hunters all worth less than 50 points, with some of the Zodiacs catching his eye. But in the end, far and away the most exciting candidate was Illumi with a score of 95. And during the Succession War, it's also been made clear that Hisoka and Illumi have a bit of a thing going on, much like Hisoka's on and off again fight relationship with Chrollo. And I swear, in Hisoka's mind, Hunter x Hunter is less of a battle shonen manga and more like a shoujo love story, where he's a high school student constantly being seduced by his classmates, forming all sorts of complex love triangles, forcing Hisoka to choose, but then they change their minds, leading to heartbreak and heartache, and it's all just, it's a lot of personal drama. During the same arc though, we probably get the most fascinating insight into Hisoka's mind, which is when we see his mental toy box, a gathering of all of the people Hisoka would like to play with, which does very notably include Kurapika, which you would think is confirmation that Hisoka is interested, but also, not really. In this box, you can also see characters like Hanzo, Satots, Menchi, and Buhara, many of which are retrospectively fairly disappointing hunters, and not at all the solid swing generators that many of the other characters present. Even Leorio is still in the box, so I don't think the Kurapika's presence here means much. In Hisoka's own words, the more toys, the more fun. So he's not very picky with who he chooses to throw into the box. However, he is very picky with his favorite toys. Fun fact, in this box, the 2011 anime made a mistake. In the manga, just above Xeno Zoldyck and behind the text, you can see Silver Zoldyck. However, the 2011 anime confused Silver for Machi, and so they gave him pink hair. To be fair, Silver and Machi do have very similar outfits, but the frizzy hair and being next to Xeno should have been a dead giveaway. Machi is one character who we don't actually see in this toy box, which is interesting because she's the only one that Hisoka has pursued a traditionally romantic relationship with. So he may not consider her to be one of his toys. Maybe he doesn't want to actually fight Machi. Perhaps Hisoka just wants a nice dinner and some good old human intercourse. I don't really know what he wants, and that's the entire problem that we are trying to solve in this video. Getting back on track, it's important to note that Hisoka has not encountered Kurapika since York New City, and thus he has no idea just how much Kurapika has grown. It's like planting a tree in your backyard and then forgetting that you have a backyard, and then one day you remember and you're like, damn, that's a big tree. Given Kurapika's increasing levels of Crawlerization, I find it hard to believe that Hisoka would still show no interest. But the problem is that Hisoka is still fixated on the original Crawler. I mean, I say problem. This isn't a problem for Kurapika. In fact, I'd say he's done pretty well in this whole situation, not becoming a target like Gon did, but it's a problem from the perspective of Hisoka, and I suppose it's also a problem for Chrollo as a result. But we can always talk about what if, and a hypothetical matchup between Kurapika and Hisoka is a weirdly exciting thought. I honestly can't say with a huge degree of confidence who I think would win. Unlike most fights in Hunter x Hunter, this would be a maybe balanced matchup, and maybe it needs its own video to explore that. But I turn to you guys, and after over 40,000 votes, the clear opinion is that Hisoka would win, potentially due to sheer experience, or the idea that at least one of Kurapika's Nen abilities is dead in the water against him. Whatever the case, the association has spoken. Do you want to know the really weird thing though? Kurapika is one of the only characters to have met Hisoka and never experienced bungee gum. So Kurapika would be going into this fight completely blind, which is a big issue because even when you know what bungee gum is, it's still a huge pain to counter and keep track of. But thankfully for Kurapika, that will never be an issue. From their very first meeting, Hisoka has had very little interest in Kurapika. He was tested, he failed, and while Kurapika has certainly had quite the Nen glow up, there is no guarantee that he will ever be capable of generating a Schwing.